class. We call this Torah study, and it is Torah. We're going to learn a little bit about the Torah that's inside of Gershon. Because Torah means instruction, and our tradition says that we all have Torah L'Cham, Torah that's inside us, Torah that helps us connect with each other and with the world. And so, for anyone who doesn't know Gershon, he's one of the CEOs of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information. And it's a think tank, does educational programs and a variety of other things like that. It's a phenomenal organization in Israel. They've been doing this now for a gazillion years?
21 years.
21 years, that's close enough to a gazillion for me. And it's been a love of his life, and he's done amazing things. Some of the things, whether you know it or not, he brought out the first letter from Gilad Shalit to let us know that he was still alive. And he's an active negotiator with that process, and he's still trying to do what he can there. It's become a little more challenging of late. He's a man that both sides will talk to. And you're one of the analysts for the Middle East, for the Vatican, you were just saying?
A number of different places.
A number of different places. So there's a lot of people who recognize the power of the analysis and the learning that he represents. And so we collect here today to learn some of that. So I'm going to get out of the limelight and turn it over to you.
Basically, what I suggest that we do here is just to use this as an open kind of session of questions and answers, and anything you want to ask about Israel or Palestine or the Middle East or the peace process or American policy or European policy, anything that's relevant. If I can answer it, I'd be happy to. And if I can't, I'll tell you that I don't know. Yeah, so tell me who you are. Also.
I'm Ted. I wanted, how did you get into this? Because I haven't heard of it.
Okay. The short version or the long version?
The short version.
How short?
21 years.
Could we start asking more questions?
Just a few words of background. I may have mentioned this, I don't remember. No thanks. Keep them away from me. I grew up in Long Island, New York. I was born in Brooklyn. Moved to Long Island to a town called Belmore when I was 4 years old. Lived in this town until I was 14 years old. This town was very Jewish, 90% Jewish. I didn't know I had one non-Jewish friend growing up. And when I was 14, and I became very politically active in the civil rights. As a child at the end of the 60s. So when I was 9 years old, we were on a family holiday, I think it was 9 or 8 years old, to Virginia, and noticed restaurants that said whites only in Virginia before the Civil Rights Act, and that sort of was the shock of my life and got me involved politically. Was involved in civil rights and anti-war movement. I had the privilege of having a very activist anti-war pro-civil rights movement congressman, Alaric Lowenstein, who some of you might remember. He created the Dump Johnson movement. And he supported Eugene McCarthy for president in 1968. You might remember that, also ancient history here. But I had the privilege of, I was just a kid, I think I was 12 years old. I met Eugene McCarthy and I met Alaric Lowenstein. Anyway, when I was 14, we moved to a very non-Jewish neighborhood. And minorities around the world do what minorities do when they look for each other. You look for some people who are similar to you. My first day in my new school, which was 2 or 3% Jewish, I was approached by this kid who had spent his summer in Israel and said, hey, we're starting a chapter of Young Judea, a Zionist youth movement, the youth movement of Hadassah, in the town. Why don't you come and join? And I went and I joined, and I liked it. It was interesting, and it was compelling and challenging, and it was a great place to meet girls. Jewish girls, which was all of a sudden important to me. And I got very involved in the Zionist youth movement, and I eventually became the president of the movement my senior year in high school. Went to Israel 2 or 3 times during that period. Went to Israel for a year after high school. Spent this year, very intensive year on the Young Judea year course in Israel, living half a year on a kibbutz and half a year in Jerusalem. And came back to the States to complete my BA before going on Aliyah. And I made a realization during this summer. I was working in the Zionist youth camp in Camp Tel Yehuda in upstate New York. And it all of a sudden dawned on me that I just spent this very intensive year in Israel, and I didn't even once during the year speak to a Palestinian. Not once. This very intensive experience of Zionist indoctrination, and never met an Arab. And I thought there was something very wrong with the education that I had, and something was not connected between my political orientation and my Zionism, and my thinking that I'm going to live in Israel, and I know so little about what's going on there. So I started reading everything that I could get my hands on that dealt with the conflict and dealt with the Arabs in Israel and the problems that we faced, and started talking to Israeli friends, and became aware very quickly that that I was not being treated seriously by Israelis. The tendency was to say to me, "You stupid, naive American, you don't know anything. You didn't fight in the army. You don't have all this baggage of the history of Israel that you're carrying with you, and you don't know them." This sentence kept coming up. You don't know them. Which made me think two different things, or raised two different questions for me. Was, one, how do they know them? You know, all these Israelis say that you don't know them. How do you know them? And the second thing was, how do I get to know them? How can I be put in a position where no one can treat me as some stupid, naive American? So I looked for some way to gain credibility. At first I thought I would go into a master's degree at the American University of Beirut, and I applied and got accepted, and they sent me the information, and they told me about campus life during the war. And it was a little crazy. It was, I mean, I was crazy, but this was really going over of living in Beirut during the civil war in Lebanon. So I was kind of despairing, not knowing exactly what to do. And a friend of mine who was studying at Boston Hebrew Teachers College saw a little flyer on a bulletin board there that a Reform rabbi in New York was looking for volunteers to go and live in Arab villages in Israel for 2 years to engage in community work and to try and build programs of cooperation between nearby Jewish and Arab communities. Sounds perfect for me. They had an office in New York. It was a program called Interns for Peace. Rabbi Bruce Cohen. So I went into their office, which was on Fifth Avenue, not far from NYU, where I was studying. I got the information and came back the next day and signed up. And I became the first intern for peace. And I went into Interns for Peace, going to live in a village inside of Israel, Israeli Arab citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel, knowing that the problem was not really the problem between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. The problem was the overriding Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict.